Hey, welcome to Nerdifyed, the first episode of the new year. I'm here with
The Wilhelm scream.
and
The cape is a lie.
and I'm Cranberry Landers. And just to get into the subject of the video today, we're going to be discussing Narnia, specifically the first volume in the Narnia series,
The Lion.
chronologically, The Lion, the
Maybe.
Witch, and the Wardrobe.
Maybe.
Yeah. Without further ado, let's get into our thoughts and feelings on The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. By the way, first off, have either of you guys read these books prior to this month?
I have not. I've known about the Narnia Chronicles for pretty much since I was like 7. But as far as the overall series of books, I've never read them. I've had tons of people recommend them. And initially I watched the American film. And then recently I got to watch the British BBC special of the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe specifically.
Yeah, it's I personally, I don't know. I like the action. I like the graphics. I like what they could do with the characters in the new movie as opposed to the BBC version. But I think I like the way the BBC version went through the story more.
I agree with that.
Yeah. So you've seen those too?
Oh, yeah. I grew up on the BBC movies. They're nostalgic for me.
Nice.
So I watch them and they still bring me back to my childhood, when I was like 9, 10 years old. And I really enjoyed those. That was what introduced me to Narnia to begin with. And then move forward, I saw the new remake of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I knew about the books. I think I picked up one of them when I was younger. I think the Horse and His Boy or something like that, or The Boy and His Horse. Yeah, something like that. I remember.
Horse and His Boy.
Yeah, I got a few chapters into that one, and then it was like, okay, kind of done reading this at the moment. And then the new Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe came out, and it kind of like renewed my interest in reading that. On top of that, I've been like diving into C.S. Lewis lately. There's another book series that if anybody is listening and interested, I recommend Out of the Silent Planet. It is a great book series.
Where are you at now?
Love it. I've read all 3 books.
Oh, you did?
That Hideous Strength. Oh my gosh. C.S. Lewis is a great writer.
I didn't like the third one.
So for the third one, it is hard to swallow at first because you're not. Spoiler. Sorry, you're not going to follow the character that you followed in the previous 2 books, but it all ties together, and it's still really good.
I don't like his. Okay, never mind. Let's really talk about Narnia.
I was going to ask, since I know that both of you guys have gotten into the other series that C.S. Lewis has written, and those being a science fiction fantasy kind of story. Having seen C.S. Lewis dabble in multiple genres, as it were, where do you guys line up on the overall idea of the Narnia series and his writing style for specifically fantasy? To me, I really enjoy it, but it is very much a children's book to me. Like,
yes.
It feels very reminiscent of almost like a version of speaking of Christmas, how you have Old Saint Nick. I sprung from my bed to see what was the matter. I heard a loud clatter, 8 tiny reindeer, that kind of stuff. That very like rhythmic style of dialogue, while also explaining a very interesting and intricate story, but
old
presented
folktale kind of stuff.
Very folktale like, but ultimately still having kind of a childlike innocence to it, but conveying very complex ideas, which compared to, say, Lord of the Rings that we finished, and I really, really enjoyed, you can very much, to me, tell the clear differences between Tolkien versus C.S. Lewis's styles of writing and how he presents characters and how they treat their audience.
Tolkien's writing was not necessarily meant for kids. C.S. Lewis really, I don't want to say dumbed down because his books aren't dumb at all, but he did lower
He
the
augmented.
vocabulary level so people at a young age could read and understand what he was putting down on paper.
Yeah, he
Sure.
adjusted it for a younger audience. He augmented it for a younger audience, or what, tailored it for a younger audience. That's what I was looking for. Yeah, and I thought that I think he's a great writer. I think C.S. Lewis is a great writer. No news. That is that is nothing new. Everybody, well, pretty much everybody knows this. I disagree with some of his, because because he's using Christian allegory and symbolism, and because he's using tales. Not like this is new either, but using tales to describe the world and explain the world and how it works.
He's all about the themes.
Yeah.
Sure.
Because he does that, I disagree with I believe I disagree with some of his theology, which means that I think that some of his story choices I disagree with. I don't like them. I believe he perceives them incorrectly, and he would think the same if I described the same things. But I think he's a great writer. I think he knows how to. I think he knows how to get his idea, his plan across. I think he has an idea for how he wants to. I think he has an idea for his stories, and he's able to accomplish those. He's able to see those through, and it be good. And yeah.
Yeah, to me, I would say he's a good writer when it comes to being fairly concise about what he's trying to convey. No matter what the circumstances is, if he's trying to convey like, oh, this, and then this occur, or if he's trying to convey a specific theme or symbolism, that comes across very clearly. I wouldn't say he's the most subtle of writers, but I think he's doing that on purpose.
Yeah.
Versus, say, Tolkien, who is in the same realm, as it were, of, I would say, writing ability, but Tolkien, to me, tends to dig deeper into the characters and the lore a little bit more, and isn't as upfront about stuff. He makes the audience, I think, infer a little bit more and kind of think about the ramifications on a grander scale, versus C.S. Lewis, who kind of tells you, this is what this is what this means, and this is what you're supposed to be getting out of this specific segment, which is really good.
I would have flipped that. I would have thought Tolkien would have been the one who gave you exactly, and C.S. Lewis made you infer. Just really? Because, yeah, I feel like his writing is shorter, so there's not as much depth and detail. So you have to infer a lot in those stories with what he's telling you, depending on which writing it is, of course, because there's a lot of C.S. Lewis's writings out there. Outside of Out of the Silent Planet and the Chronicles of Narnia, I mean, you've got a lot of Christian writings dealing with apologetics, The Great Divorce, The Pilgrim's Progress, Mere Christianity. There's a whole bunch of other titles out there by C.S. Lewis.
Screwtape Letters. I was going to say Screwtape Letters, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big one too. And with those, you have to infer a lot, especially in Screwtape Letters. That was a big one where you have to really kind of infer what's going on and then understand there's a whole other side to the picture from which you're reading. Sure. And you have to understand that side in order to understand the book, and you're not getting all the details of that side. So you have to infer what's being told to you. And I think that was written on purpose by C.S. Lewis for that reason. Anyways, I digress. Both Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, great writers. Pretty much anything you pick up and reread of theirs, if you can push your way through it, it is some of the best stuff you'll ever read.
I think he's really. I think C.S. Lewis is good at pulling you in, good at getting you into the story. I think he's really good at easing you into it, and I think he's really good at using characters and using objects, points, ideas to communicate what he wants to communicate, like the symbolism or whatever. I think he's really good at that. I would agree more that it seems like Tolkien is more character driven, and and it feels like I'm being told by C.S. Lewis how the story will go. But either way, I do believe that there's a difference there in my mindset, in a worldview, and that's what guides a lot of that difference in storytelling between Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, because if you come at things from well, Tolkien also did, if everything's predestined, but if you're coming from a point where this is a grand tale, I have the plot laid out, I have all the points laid out, I would understand you using characters more as tools. And again, it is built for children, so I also understand that.
I will say this, I didn't really think about it at the time, but after kind of marinating on it, specifically speaking of both authors' voice and how that comes through in different ways and similar ways, I find it interesting that both Lord of the Rings, which touches on it very briefly, where C.S. Lewis and The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe touch on it much more significantly, is the idea of destiny and the fact that there is a pre-established myth about the main characters. So in Tolkien, it's brushed on very, very lightly. Like you hear bits and pieces of somebody saying like, oh, this has been preordained, or oh, this was spoken of in myth, of the 9 that will come about from the many realms or many kingdoms or whatever, and they will defeat the Dark One and that kind of stuff. And it's not really touched on that much, but you know that, oh, this exists in this world, where Narnia, it's in the forefront. They're blatantly having Aslan. Exactly. 2 daughters of Eve, 2 sons of Adam. And it highlights it first and foremost that, oh, no, this is all destiny. This has been well established, and we've been waiting for it to happen. Yeah, and the prophecy is finally coming true. I found that interesting that they both did that in their first books.
Yeah, I have fondness for when I read the books, when I read Narnia and The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe years ago, I really liked the characters, and that was something. It's something that was in common with Tolkien, but for C.S. Lewis, for the Narnia series, I really wanted to see the development of all 4 of those sons and daughters of Adam and Eve. I wanted to really see their progress, and something that was apparent to me in the book, The Lion, Witch, and Wardrobe, was that there is so much darkness in the story. It's presented as in a very simple and with a light touch. You know, this is what's happening, but very dark implications
and subject matter.
And subjects. It's deeply dark in the story, especially regarding the witch. It's very dark. The implications of what's happening with the enemies, the allies of the witch. There's a lot of depth there, and that's surprising, especially viewing it with adult eyes. You're going, this is something that exists. It's to the point where I would consider, is this too much for these characters, these child characters, to be doing this stuff? But in history, throughout history, for thousands of years, young men and women have been around war and been involved in wars and bloodshed. That's something that they had seen. Only now is there, in some places, less exposure to that. So it's something that I question, but also going, you know, this is a fact of reality, and kids probably do have a way of dealing with this. You know, the process of Peter becoming the king, becoming the was it Wolfslayer, Wolfsbane? What, I forget his name.
Oh, his title. I
Yeah,
cannot remember either.
But anyways, the High King Peter, going from Peter the schoolboy to Peter High King. That's really cool.
Peter, the Lord of Bust You Up. Yes.
Yeah. That was a great scene, by the way.
Yeah. I'm wondering, Cape is Alive, with your perspective, because you seem to be kind of a little bit different than my view on like Tolkien versus C.S. Lewis. As far as the way that C.S. Lewis shows the characters and how he presents like action and that kind of stuff, how did you feel about how he conveys kind of almost like not necessarily the pacing, but almost like the kind of describing what's happening in the scene and giving you a full image? Because to me, I kind of liked how he shows the action. He presents it in a very straightforward way that's easy to keep track of, like, this character is here, this character is there, I know what's happening in between, and I know what's happening when they're doing an action. Where I felt like when I was reading Lord of the Rings, I'd sometimes get lost in where people were, what they were doing. And I would try and not even the timeline, but just literally the
physical presence of where they were.
Yeah, the positioning in a specific environment. It was hard to keep track sometimes, where I feel like I didn't have that in this book. It was very easy, very straightforward to understand where they are.
I feel as it goes with details of surroundings, C.S. Lewis does a really good job of kind of laying out your landscape for you. Like, this is the physical landscape. Here's why it matters. This is what's happening. Tolkien, on the other hand, he gives you detail of character. He'll give you positioning of people, and he'll tell you the important, physical events that happen within the story, but he isn't keen on necessarily describing the land. He'll give you a description, and he'll, kind of say, okay, here's the big points and the big areas that you need to know about, but he doesn't really go into like, oh, the second tree on the left had a brown leaf on it, whereas I feel like something like that might be something that C.S. Lewis would do. You get to the beaver dam, and, it's kind of inferred that, Mr. Beaver stands there and he's waiting for them to like comment on his home and how nicely it's built,
Right.
And so you're getting a sense of like, oh, this is a really nice beaver dam. And so when you think of a beaver dam and like something that a beaver would be proud of through human perspective, what do you imagine? You're probably going to imagine like this pretty big beaver dam that sits there. And if it's big enough to house 4 humans for dinner and for them to move around inside of it and, cook in a kitchen, I think you can kind of grasp the concept here of what was trying to be relayed. Whereas I think of like the meeting where the fellowship is established, like you get everybody in the room, but you don't really know what the rest of the room looks like. You don't know what the ceiling is. You have like, okay, there's this meeting in this grand hall. Great. What color are the walls? Who built this thing? How long has it been there? That kind of thing. And like there is some sense of that stuff, but the detail isn't, I think, as great in that area. However, I do feel like the depth of character that's described to you as you meet each character in Tolkien stories is far longer and greater than it would be for that of C.S. Lewis in Narnia. Not that you don't get a good grasp of character through the interactions that C.S. Lewis has, which I also think is pretty great. He does a great job of communication.
Yeah, he does.
And so that is what I take from that.
Yeah, great. Yeah. There was something else I did notice that I thought, like you pointed out, Cape is Lie, that Tolkien focused less on the environment. I mean, he did focus on it, but the character, the depth of character, and how layered all these characters were, that was immense. And you could see, I mean, he had a great depth. It's crazy how well he built up these characters. Like they seem like real people.
And he lays that out for you. Whereas if I could contrast real quick, sorry, I'm not trying to interrupt you, Cranberry Landers. Again, I'm going to go back to Mr. Beaver because I think Mr. Beaver is such a character, such a well done character. He is supposed to be a representation of your common middleman, right? Like middle class man, that has worked hard, does good by his family,
Or
his
just
wife.
tail off.
That's what he's supposed to be. And you kind of get a sense of that in the book, when it's kind of giving you description of him, the things that he's proud of and how he talks. I think was also a big part of that too. They sit down to dinner. What does Mr. Beaver have? What do the children have to drink? And the story kind of dives into that. And so you get a pretty good character description and you're able to understand, oh, this is what this is trying to relay here. And you have, I think through the dialogue, your character is created with C.S. Lewis, whereas with Tolkien doesn't use the dialogue to create the character. He literally creates the character for you. And then the characters interact with their dialogue.
I think also part of it might be that, one, there's a scale issue. There's a scale thing with Tolkien. I'm going to say Tolkien because that's how I used to pronounce it. Tolkien. There's a scale. Is it? I don't know. There's a scale issue with Tolkien in that he's doing huge, grand scale things. I mean, there are settings that are smaller, but something that struck me was that C.S. Lewis, at least for The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, it's extremely contained. It's extremely small when he sets up a setting, a location. It's very small, which is very different from C.S. Lewis, and also the attention to detail with like the physicality and everything. I think that might also because he might have been trying to gear it towards children again more, and kids might have more of an attachment to physical things, physical objects instead of the psychology and the symbol, like the theology and stuff that people are speaking about and the things they're dealing with in the Lord of the Rings series or in his book.
I think it might be almost an unfair comparison. I know I was the one that actually broached the subject of them versus each other, but to me, when I think about the vastness that Tolkien uses to build the 3 books that he has to establish a full world and everything else, it's probably unfair of us to compare it between a single novel of Narnia, even though it is a chronicle. It's multiple books telling a giant grand story, but they also involve multiple characters that come in and out. So to me, it might be more reasonable, and I found the connection pretty clear of The Hobbit and the Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. How they're presented, the smallness of Narnia, like to me, it doesn't feel like this giant, immense world as much. It feels more like a pocket dimension where it's a small group. Like you have an area of wooded trees, you have the area that has the evil creatures and the witch, and then you have the area that has the good creatures and the kingdom that's established by Aslan and the castle waiting for the sons of Adam, the daughters of Eve to show up and be able to fulfill that prophecy. But I never felt like it was this gigantic, immense world I didn't think of it as another Earth. I thought of it where Middle Earth, I do feel that way. I feel like it could go on indefinitely. You have regions that they don't even speak about, where Narnia, to me, felt very closed in.
Well, I'll say this. I meant it feels closed in, and the settings, the locations feel close. They feel closed in, small. The books, when you read the entire series, it is much larger. And they do get into more detailed stuff. It does get more detailed, in depth in the latter books. It feels very small, but it actually is a very expansive location, Narnia.
I've got to poke the elephant in the room here.
Poke the elephant in the room. Okay.
Yeah. So the thing that we're not talking about here is the Magician's Nephew, and the Magician's Nephew is truly the first story of Narnia.
Truly?
Yes,
Would you call it the Silmarillion of the Narnia books?
By what criterion are you using first? What's first to you?
Oh man. So okay, do I have to break all of the magician's nephew here?
No,
Because
you,
okay,
you're gonna have to.
You could be very
No,
vague.
no. I'm just gonna say publishing comes first. That's first, and then everything comes after. By the way, the first Star Wars movie, it's not one of the prequels. It's not Rogue One. It is Star Wars
it's
or
episode
A New
one.
Hope.
It's episode one.
No, it is not. No.
Are you
So
saying
you can
it's
go ahead and
Star
say
Wars?
you can say
Okay,
that's the
so
first
The
one.
Magician's Nephew, if you've ever read it, it is quite literally the prequel to The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. You start out reading about Peter, Lucy.
Oh, we have to say spoilers then. We have to say
okay,
spoilers.
fine. Spoilers.
Spoilers for the magician's nephew.
is actually the uncle of the four you read about in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. He is the professor that owns the house. He knows about the White Witch because he's met her before. He
Kind of
knows
his fault that
about
she was
Narnia
there.
because he was there when it was created. The magician's nephew was in Narnia when it was created by Aslan. You have a clear depiction of
Hang on.
Aslan
Are we going to get into
creating Narnia
Narnia?
in the magician's nephew.
Are we going to get into the whole Narnia Chronicles of Narnia?
Well,
or are we just
I
going to
think-
stick to
I think we should
Language in the Wardrobe?
rein it in a little bit so we can really enjoy it when we do actually go over the magician's nephew. That being said, with the creation of Narnia, even with that and having that in the back of my head with the rest of the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, to me, I still felt like, in comparison to obviously other fantasy novels of the time, be that Tolkien, The Lord of the Rings still felt grander in scale and presented the world, I thought, in a much larger sense, versus even the creation and seeing a literal world come into being that you do see in that situation. But to me, it still felt slightly smaller, which is, to me, really cool.
Right. It's not that it is smaller or is larger. By the way, I think you could argue that the Lord of the Rings, that Tolkien's universe is larger because it's a universe.
Right.
But then you're arguing dimensionality, which also, anyways. But
Right.
but Narnia is very expansive. But yeah, just to make the point, it feels smaller. You don't know that it is smaller. That it's not that it is smaller. It feels smaller.
Right. Based
If you've
on
ever
the
read any of Lewis's other works, you understand that he wrote this way intentionally for children because he needed to have them focus on the story at hand.
Right.
That is the reason why everything feels smaller, because you do not want to overload a child with information that they're going to eventually check out on. You know, you have a limited amount of time to convey a story and keep a child interested. And what do you tell them? What do you give them to reel them in, to buy into this story? And I think C.S. Lewis did a great job in writing The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, because he does exactly what's needed in order to capture a child's imagination. You start off with the all four of them, they wind up at the professor's mansion, and you're kind of getting a grasp, that there's some family problems there, stuff has happened. They get there, and then you follow Lucy, who happens to be the youngest of the bunch. She's, supposed to be the most honest, the most fair. She's the good one out of the group, and she winds up in this world and then meets a fawn, while she's there in Narnia, and stuff happens. She gets out of Narnia, comes back, goes to tell everybody about what happened, and they all assume that she's a liar. And this, then brings you to the rest of the story, which I'm not going to go over every chapter of the story here, but they sit down with the uncle eventually, and they discuss Lucy and whether or not she's being honest or she's telling a lie, and what's known about her character. And I think that this is a great concept of character development, because you are using dialogue to communicate not only who Lucy is as a character, but who everybody else as a character is as well.
That was something,
especially the uncle.
That was something that was very apparent to me when I read the Chronicles of Narnia before and now. how he laid out scenes and the dialogue, I could very clearly see the actors.
Yeah.
I could very clearly see their positions within a space.
Totally.
What people might be reacting like just by absence of words and pacing and everything else. I think he's very good at that.
He builds every scene really, really well.
Unspoken, but good story building. Deep, but unspoken. He has a lot of space, but with what he shows, it shows that he has that stuff planned out.
To me, the thing that you guys pointed out specifically about the beavers, having started out with only watching the newer early 2000s version of the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the beavers pretty much play the smallest aspect in the movie. Like, they're in there for a little bit of time, they establish something very quickly about Narnia, and then they're gone. When they show them, I think, like briefly during some of the fight scenes, and that's pretty much it. Where reading the book and pleasantly surprised watching the BBC special from the 90s, they really show the clear aspects and emphasis on the beavers and how much they really do impact the plot. They pretty much establish everything for, like, they deal with establishing, oh, Aslan is coming back, all of these different things about Narnia itself, the fact that, oh, winter is still here, who we have to avoid, the secret police, that kind of stuff. They establish so much in the lore, and you get to see them as real characters. They're not just, oh, I'm a cardboard cutout of a beaver that's going to tell you what needs to happen, and then they disappear. No, they're fully established. Oh, do you like my home? Don't I have a beautiful home? Compliment me on my cool house.
They're fully fledged characters. They're people.
They're 3D characters, which is really cool to see. And for a character that could have been thrown away easily.
And in this world, it's very apparent how strange Lucy, Peter, what's his name? Edmund and Sue. How strange they are in this world, and how people like, or how much these creatures are people. They are a kind of people or whatever, and showing that though you're seeing these as animals, you need to regard these as actual characters and think through what they're doing. At that time, it's great. It's a lot better than just having like a talking animal gimmick.
Yeah, it adds a real reality to the characters, which is, you see a clear level of respect for even the simplest character that's presented. Like, one of the scenes that really stood out to me was when
the Red-Crested Robin.
Well, that, and when Edmund is working his way to return to the witch, and he sees all these statues, and he's looking at the statues, and at first he's scared of the lion, etc., and realizes it's a statue, and makes fun of it, draws a mustache on it, which you really see so much about his character, as well as why he's doing these things, and the overall world by how he's reacting to it that way. And then eventually you get to him standing, and I could see it in my head of him arching his leg over the wolf, because he's just like, oh, it's another statue, it's fine. And he's just about to get on the other side, and then it goes, what are you doing here? He's like, ah! And he freaks out. And I love the fact that even the slightest character, who basically he's almost an unnamed villain that is just doing the bidding of the big bad, the witch.
White witch.
But you still get to convey in such a simple and short amount of time who he is, how he presents himself, based on how he's acting and reacting to a child of Adam being here, and then how he, instead of just being, oh, I'm the wolf and I growl, rah, 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 he's not just a lapdog, ironically, of her. He's a character. He has a personality. He thinks, he decides things. He acts in a noble fashion of being of status, of being this secret police. Even though he's doing a terrible thing, you still see the fact that he takes into account his actions, and he doesn't just act animalistic, and he's not even just a throwaway character. the smallest characters throughout this, including the crested robin and how that's interacting with the characters, it's all important, and it shows character depth by how they act, how they react to the characters, and what they say. So it's really, really cool and phenomenal writing. But I don't know about you guys. When I was listening to this, because I did the audiobook version, one, I had it in a British person saying or reading it out loud, so that was adding to the flavor, definitely. I also had a fake fire on a TV in the background, and I even made sure that it wasn't just a generic regular red flame. I made sure that it had weird colors in the fire because I was like, I want to get this magical fantasy feel. And that really did help. But also, having listened to this first, even though I had seen visual formats of it, listening to it and reading this version of it, something about C.S. Lewis's writing in comparison to, say, Tolkien or other fantasy novels that I've read, this felt like a warm blanket to me.
Right. Yeah. It's definitely built for kids as a bedtime story.
Yeah.
Kind of
100%.
Yeah, and it's meant to be read out loud to someone.
Yeah.
Kids. Yeah. I picked that up from it. Yeah. The other thing was with the characters, with the animals characters, if you imagine animals with their capabilities with people knowledge, intelligence, it makes them much more of a threat than just a generic animal.
100%.
And something that struck me about the end of the book was that something that I got from the first reading and from this, I really cared for the characters, especially when they were leaving the world, when things were passing by, when they were getting out of the wardrobe and everything. I was sad. I teared up a little bit to watch the characters go, and it was something that I wanted to watch. It really made me want to read the next one. But the whole psychology going through from childhood to adulthood was something that was really it's something that kids have thought about, and it was really hard, or it was a hard thing to wrestle with. Not that it was a hard concept, but that it was there's a lot of deep kind of psychological things going on, dealings with them aging, de-aging in that time, and the repercussions of that once they go back to the regular world, and how they're going to be children passing into adulthood, and passing from adulthood to childhood again, and the fact that this is something that they're sharing, and people are going to think they're nuts if they open up word one about this. I thought that was interesting.
And how do you go back to being children after being rulers of a kingdom, having gained so much knowledge and wisdom, and then being thrown back into your tiny little body? I'm interested to see how that presents itself in the next few novels.
I also consider that it's kind of like the same thing if you go to war, or if you go into an occupation where it's very severe, a lot of danger involved, and then you go back to normal working world, normal people, and you're like, well, I have all this terrible knowledge, experience. I've seen death. I've killed. I've done these things. I've led people, and now I'm coming back here, and people are just, they're completely unaware, or they're very happy about life and stuff. They don't seem to know it, and how you adjust to that. But I thought it was interesting that he did also show that they had not a regression, but a return to childish thought, childish way of expressing things once they were on their way out. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes me think of when you have, like, in this circumstance, it makes you think of child soldiers, kind of, which is awful, and in our modern day is a terrible, terrible thing. But throughout history, we obviously have people that at a young age had to take positions that normally you would never want to have thrusted upon you, but in reality, it was just the circumstances of the day and had to be done to protect a person's homeland, or some people, older ruler dies and I have to take his position, that kind of stuff. But it's interesting, the idea of perspective when you've gone through such an extreme traumatic event, and you come back home, and I know one of the sayings is, oh, you can never really come back home. And to me, it's kind of the same idea. When you've dealt with someone trying to stab you in the face with a giant sword or crush you under their hooves or something, it's kind of hard to have that a week before that, and then you come home and somebody wants to argue with you over muffins. Like, it's not the same. You don't care as much, I don't think.
Don't touch my tea and crumpets.
Yeah, more tea and crumpets.
There's also the dichotomy or aspect that they went from being a burden. They get shipped off to their uncle's house or whatever, and they're just luggage, pretty much. And they're there to be safe while the other people go and fight their wars and protect them. And they go from there to, you are protecting a world. You are going to be protecting them. And yeah,
I'm going to add to that. The whole reason they went into the wardrobe is because they were trying to stay out of the way and not be a burden.
That's right.
I believe that they were being chased into there. And so,
chased into greater responsibility, chased into becoming your best version.
Yeah.
Like yeah. Yeah. I always wanted to see more blood from Peter and Eddie. Not on their persons, but from those they decapitate and such, disembowel. I wanted to see that.
Lovely. I want more gore in my children's
I did. I wanted them as a child, by the way.
There's not enough beheadings in this fantasy for children.
Calvin and Hobbes, Calvin opening up snowmen and seeing their entrails fall out. That was I completely.
You wanted it to lean more Grimm's fairy tale. You wanted the Cinderella sisters with the freakish mutilated feet,
chopping off their feet.
Yeah.
No, I wanted more than that. But yes, I in that line. But yeah, I really enjoyed it, and it was a common fantasy that I had, The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. It was a common fantasy for me as a child to go to another world, to be a knight, to fight, and to have magic, and to defeat the evil. That was something.
I think before we had the implementation of today's video games, that was the common theme of a lot of children during our age, is we would, go off into the woods or hang out with the neighbors, adventuring the playground, running the castle, and those were all common themes of, we're going to imagine ourselves in another world and be something greater than what we are. And that's something that a lot of children would do. And I do think that is something that might be lost today, just because of the ability now to literally check out and go to another world in a screen, where they're interacting with whatever the screen is telling you to interact with. I do think it's one of the reasons why I like this story so much, because I have a kid on the way and I have the opportunity now to share this story and inspire imagination at the right time. And I think that this is a great gateway to that, to help kids recapture the imagination. That imagination is what helps inspire things and create, the new big things that nobody ever thought was possible. And I do think we're going to need some more of that here in the future.
That's something that's something I noticed that they're missing with the video games and with current stories. It's that altruism, or that good morality, that virtue that they had in those stories, and being good and fighting evil, actually being opposed to evil, and there being evil, like outright evil. And that's something that I think that kids will need going forward. And I think that's a good thing that's lost these days. So unless you go to these stories.
I will be the devil's advocate then on the other side of it, because I can understand that perspective for both of you guys. But to me, I think how we see it now, you have something that was written nearly 100 years ago. And yet these classic noble concepts are still something that we as human beings hunger for and we identify with so strongly. That's why you can still see this being remade and remade and remade. And I think there's talk about them making another series of, I think, like a show or a mini series of these books, because we can identify with these very key core concepts of being a person of nobility, doing something, standing up for what's right, fighting what's wrong, and protecting those who need protecting. I don't think it's gone away. I do think that in our more modern Western culture, it's shrunken the amount of time that we can really have specifically children get to see this, identify with it, and kind of latch on to these ideas. But I don't think they are completely gone away. I don't think it's something that's been lost. It's been diminished 100%. But even like something as simple as something that when I was a kid, I would think would be kind of cheap and not a really interesting idea. One of the things that you always see is like Paw Patrol, which is the idea of animals, just simple generic animals, very reminiscent of like 101 Dalmatians, but they are doing noble jobs that are there to protect people. They're being firemen, they're being police officers, they're being this, and this. They're doing things that would, in our regular society, aren't highlighted as much, but are very, very good, powerful, important jobs that help people. It's ultimately potentially 100% self-sacrifice. You're jumping into the fire to protect those who can't protect themselves. And so I don't think the key concepts and ideas that are so integral and intertwined in this kind of story, where it's people going that aren't prepared, they go to go do something and be better than they would be initially, and reaching for that higher status and higher concept and reaching basically their true potential. I don't think that's gone away. It has taken different shapes and different forms, but I don't think it's completely gone yet. That's the reason you can have children that identify with a Dalmatian that has a stupid fireman's cap on. It's how you can have people go, hey, I grabbed this stick because I'm a knight and I will protect you. Or, oh, I'm a lightsaber and I will protect you. Same idea, Jedi Knights, that kind of thing. It takes a different shape, but ultimately they're still conveying the same really, really important ideas.
I disagree, but
Cape
is a line
as well.
Yeah.
And something I want to point out that's pretty apparent nowadays is public school. When you were going through public school, did your teachers ever decide to pick up The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and read that with you as part of a class activity?
No.
I would have loved that, but no.
Yeah. As far as today, what are they teaching 6-year-olds in the classroom?
Right. A lot more moral ambiguity, grayness, and
these are the people who are supposed to be the teachers that are raising this next generation. So as far as morality and ethics go, I do think that there is a twisting of the arm per se to corrupt those at a young age going through our public systems. This is my personal opinion, and I'm not going to put this opinion on anybody else in here. So take it as people may. If you're listening to this, I do think
I agree. So
that's
but
fair.
Also, when I was a child and I was in those grades, even then I didn't look to the school for that kind of knowledge.
So
I knew what I was but obviously other children may not. Other children may be more naive and may be more influenced by what's around them in the school.
You're saying that it's diminished. You're saying availability is there. What is presented to children? What is presented to children the most now? It is moral relativism. It is it is bad guys or good guys doing bad things. And what I'm talking about is the prevalence. What I think the Cape is Lie and I are talking about is the prevalence of games, of stories where you do have characters that aren't morally upright. They're not morally good.
No, we're in the era of anti-hero.
And the good, the bad are doing good things. And you would say that there's not a distinguishing factor there, that you don't have a truly good person. The closest you have is Paw Patrol that you referenced. there were many stories, and it was common that you would see good characters, good, and you would see bad. And you do see in this story that they have defects, but the thing is, they're seeking out, they're moving towards the good, as opposed to excusing the bad in their lives. And this is something that, and you say that it's diminished. Yes,
I'd say the amount of time is shrunken.
You'd say that these stories, these classic hero tales, and these good people, these kind of moral tales, these are gone, or that they're diminished. But that's what I'm talking about. Nothing is really diminished nothing is completely gone these days. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the overwhelming 99%, 98% of the stories, of the stuff that you have. It's not good. It's not something that kids can become. They're not going to look at that as a role model. And when they do look at what is available as role models, they're not at the same level. And it is distinguishing that. And you do have characters, you do have these tales which have been used, which do exist. You do have characters that were good, but it's a constant process. And you can look at modern movies, modern shows, you can look at modern games, and they're always in a process of corrupting these characters, of making them less.
Right.
The fact that the characters exist, you can say yes.
Because we live in an era of the gritty version of whatever we have.
Well,
they want it to be like, even taking a simple concept of the Knights of Camelot, the Round Table, you have King Arthur. I can't think of a straightforward King Arthur film.
I'm not saying gritty.
I'm saying as an example, because they always try and make things, they try and twist it into something that's, it's the darker version. It's the perspective of the bad guy.
They do gritty. Kind of I'm not talking about grittiness. I'm talking about they introduce character defects, which isn't gritty. It's not the same as being gritty. They introduce character defects, which they identify as defects, weaknesses to characters which did not exist.
Sure.
They're giving motivations to characters, and those motivations didn't exist. Bad motivations. They're introducing bad motivations to good characters where they didn't have those bad motivations previous to now. And that's what I'm saying. So you can have Mario, and it's Mario. He's a guy with the mustache. He's got a red hat. And he's got, the sideburns and everything, and the overalls. That's Mario. But you introduce, now he hates women or something like that, and they introduce that in the character.
I mean,
and this is something
addicted to shrooms.
This is something they've been doing, and that's what we're missing. This is why people go. They take the towers that things are built on, and then they undermine the towers, and then they question why the tower. They question why the tower fell. You undermine the pillars, and you question why the tower fell. It's because you're tearing away at the pillars that these things were built on.
Right.
On the story,
if you diminish the foundation, it's not going to be able to hold
and you can't do it. You want to do that, but I think they're missing it, and it's something that was very apparent to me while I read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. This is a tale. This is a story which you're not gonna see made. If you do, it's not going to get traction. It's not going to get played in theaters or whatever. You're not going to see this broadcast as heavily or put in the places that you would see another movie.
Well, I mean,
we had 3 movies, and then they ended the series before the series actually ended.
Yeah,
I mean, that's kind of the writing on the wall there. Where we were excited and we were all wanting to see these things being made, into this live action film where we could watch these books that, stretched our imagination play out on the big screen, and we could, see these things happen. And then all of a sudden, nothing. It was like, oh, well, we've got this, and, Hollywood came in, tried to spin it to make things happen that weren't actually happening in the story. And it kind of fell off because no one wanted to adhere to the actual story. And if anything has a, dare I say, Christian undertone to it, it will be firmly rejected.
And they also didn't publicize the third film as much as the others. I noticed it was noticeable. The first one, tons of publicity for that.
Even the second one had a decent.
That one had a second one. Third one, I was like, is this the third one? Because people aren't talking about this, and they're not showing this in ads. They're not showing this on TV. They're not putting it out there. And
I forgot that the third one came out.
And
that's a testament to how little that made an impact, because I couldn't even remember the fact that Voyage of the Dawn Treader had come out.
Well, the fact that it was out, that was the thing. It was out, but you weren't seeing ads. You weren't seeing not merchandising,
publicity,
marketing. You're not seeing marketing for this. Yeah, publicity. You're not seeing that, and But either way, I wish they had continued the series. I liked some of the actors. It got worse with age, but some got better. But I liked the series. I liked the books, and I think they're due for, if they stick to their roots, I think they're good for a series or a series of movies.
When I compare the idea of the BBC version from the 90s, which to me is extremely accurate. At least I haven't gotten to see the other ones yet, but I have seen The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Comparing that to the novel, it is very, very accurate. Like, to the point where when I was watching, or when I was listening to the audiobook of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, I was seeing the BBC version more than anything I had seen of the 2000s film. Which the 2000s film had way more money put behind it, way bigger budget, way more elaborate special effects, things that really usually stand out to you in a visual medium. And yet I was identifying more with what was happening in the very cheesy, almost school play level of special effects that were in the BBC version.
Because it's accurate.
Yeah, and it clearly conveys the tone, the pacing, the characters of the book so well and so accurately that I looked at that so much more in my mind's eye when I was listening to the story versus the modern stuff that was coming across. Because even though you had all this bombastic and even more action, which you were saying that you wanted to see Peter cut people in half and stuff like that.
Well, in the books.
Right. But even though in the movies they have more, call it action, call it violence, they had more happening in it to try and juice up what was already established. I didn't think of that when I was listening to the book. I was thinking of the more quieter, simpler, childlike version that's presented in the BBC version, which I think is a testament to modern sensibilities versus even as something as simple as 30 years ago, what we look at for the presentation of this type of story. And I really loved this book. I thought it was awesome.
Oh, really?
Like, it was fantastic. It's incredibly simple to me. It's not terribly complex, but I also didn't expect it to be something crazy. It was a nice palate cleanser, I think, after finishing the really elaborate, really deep, really rich world of The Lord of the Rings. Then having these characters come about, and it's something very simple, very quaint, but not cheap. It's a rich, but very simple idea. Like instead of having all these really complex meals where it's a steak dinner and all this and 1,000 different toppings, and then this is just like having like a really good quality vanilla ice cream.
I think C.S. Lewis is masterful in his writing for that reason, because you have a children's story where I think that at a basic level, a 6-year-old child can sit down, read this story, and understand it. Whereas you have an adult who comes in and reads it, and they're still going to enjoy it because there is an adult theme behind it, right? There is something more to be gained from it. And I do think that C.S. Lewis does a great job of balancing that and understood who he was writing to when he wrote this. he is a phenomenal writer. I don't think that there's anybody out there that could disagree with me in that statement. What I would encourage is, if you haven't read it, read it. If you are looking for another book series that's more, I guess, aimed or geared towards adults, check out Out of the Silent Planet. Those 3 books are definitely worth your time. You will enjoy them, and get ready to think and reread some of the stuff you've read.
I recommend learning a little bit about Christian theology before you get into those books. But either way, it should be fun. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that it's absolutely necessary, but if you do have a little bit of knowledge before going in there, it will definitely help you out.
Well, Capuzli, do you have any final point?
Read the Chronicles of Narnia if you haven't. Check out C.S. Lewis. He's a great writer, and I think that's about it.
Yeah, I think that's it. It was a really great read. Thanks. I enjoyed reading it again. I think we all did, and it was great.
Totally.
Next up, we might be doing Guardians of the Galaxy, the holiday special, but we might also be in the future looking at doing reviews on the other Narnia books, if that's interesting to anyone. Well, just from all of us here at Nerdifyed, we want to thank you, and thanks for sticking around. Comment, like, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.
Go Aslan, nerds.
All right, bye everybody.
Later, nerds.